Here's my take on what every team did in the 2023 NFL Draft. So let's get into it division by division. The Philadelphia Eagles get a G+, and the G stands for Georgia. Howie Roseman is obsessed with drafting Georgia players. He took 2 last year with Jordan Davis and Nakobe Dean, and took 3 more this year with Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, and Keely Ringo. Not to mention Georgia alum DeAndre Swift, who he traded for on day 3 of the draft. The Georgia-Delphia Bull Eagles are primed to make another Super Bowl push, and they definitely helped their cause in this draft. The Dallas Cowboys had a rough couple days. I'm convinced they accidentally drafted the wrong Smith in the first round, as they took Michigan defensive tackle Mozzie Smith while Georgia's Nolan Smith was still on the board. They also got jumped by the Bills for tight end Dalton Kincaid and had to settle for Luke Schoonmaker in the late second round instead. The best moment of the draft for them was probably selecting running back Deuce Vaughn, who's the son of one of their scouts.
You want to come to work with me next week?
I wouldn't mind that.
So that was a really cool moment. And with Vaughn measuring in at a whopping 5'6" and 176 pounds, the Cowboys are setting a great example for the rest of us in life. They make sure to appreciate the little things. The New York Giants drafted cornerback Deonte Banks with their first pick, which makes sense when you consider the demon receivers they have in their division. They also got Daniel Jones some help. They took center John Michael Schmitz in the second round, who will try to prevent Jones from getting clubbed so often. And they took Jalen Hyatt, which gives DJ someone new to throw to. Which is good, because his current receiving core is one of the most depressing things I've ever seen. The Washington Commanders drafted Slender Man with their first pick, which was interesting since Christian Gonzalez was still on the board, but hey, whatever. Much like the Giants, they figured corner is a priority with CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown, and Isaiah Hodgins terrorizing the division. They even took a safety with their second pick to double down on the secondary, and thank goodness, because Darius Slayton is headed for a breakout. I can just feel it. Washington also didn't add a quarterback, which means it's Sam Howell time, for better or for worse. Still, the Commanders can already consider this upcoming season a success, since it'll be the first one without Dan Snyder leading the charge since 1999. The Detroit Lions reached on both their first round picks harder than Dez Bryant reached for the goal line against the Packers in 2014. The only difference is the Lions picks might actually work out instead of resulting in complete devastation for the entire fan base. I don't dislike Jahmyr Gibbs or Jack Campbell. It was just a weird use of draft capital, since Gibbs was projected to go in the late 20s and Campbell was seen as a second rounder. And it's especially weird when you see the Lions celebrating the Gibbs pick like they were shocked he fell to them. Overall, I actually like their draft class. They brought in Sam Laporta because apparently Iowa tight ends grow on trees. They got Brian Branch at a great value, and they got Hendon Hooker. And anytime you can get a hooker for cheap, you gotta do it, right? The Minnesota Vikings used their first round pick on another weapon to make Kirk Cousins look better than he actually is. Jordan Addison is a perfect complement to Justin Jefferson, especially with Adam Thielen out of town. Also, not entirely relevant, but something that made me uncomfortable. The Vikings made 6 draft picks, all of whom were players from 3-letter abbreviated schools. I don't know, I just don't like it. The Vikings also drafted Jaron Hall out of BYU as a potential backup quarterback to Kirk, and it's a nice reminder that the 5th round is the absolute highest that a BYU quarterback should ever be drafted in the 21st century. The Green Bay Packers may have moved on from Aaron Rodgers, but I guess old habits die hard, because they still didn't draft a skill player in the first round when it seemed incredibly obvious that they should. Mommy, can we have Jackson Smith-Njigba? No, honey, we have Jackson Smith-Njigba at home. That's Samori Toure for those of you that don't know, which is probably most of you. Credit to Green Bay though, they did rack up some skill guys in the following rounds with tight ends Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft, and wide receivers Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks. Will that be enough to help Jordan Love become an above average quarterback? I don't know, but at least they're trying. Kinda. The Chicago Bears had an opportunity to draft arguably the best player in the draft with their number 9 pick, but they said, you know what, let's trade back one spot, let the Eagles get him instead, and make sure Justin Fields gets killed a little less this season. Their first pick, Darnell Wright, is a large man who will be assigned to protect his quarterback from other large men. They also drafted a large man on the other side of the ball to help their 31st ranked run defense, got a guy named Zach, whose name looks like a typo, and Roshan Johnson, who just might be their new starting running back. Not a bad haul, especially when it basically includes DJ Moore. The Seattle Seahawks came into this draft with a clear motive: maximize their championship window around star quarterback Geno Smith, which still feels illegal to say. I'm not saying Devon Witherspoon will join Tariq Woolen, Jamal Adams, and Quandre Diggs and create the new Legion of Boom, but they can at least create the Legion of good. Then they got Jackson Smith-Njigba, thanks Green Bay, so they can get out ahead of any potential Tyler Lockett fall off, since that dude's been good for way too long. They helped their offense even more with running back Zach Charbonnet in the second round, and even though his last name sounds like a whine, the only whining going on is from Kenneth Walker's fantasy football owners. Did you know the LA Rams haven't made a first round pick in 7 years? Yeah, Jared Goff was their last first round pick, so this year was nothing new. But hey, they spent their second rounder on guard Steve Avila from TCU, which was smart because keeping your 35-year-old quarterback from getting sacked all the time is probably a good idea. But the most fun pick for the Rams has to be the guy who decimated Steve Avila's TCU squad in the national championship game, Stetson Bennett. Honestly, it's a great fit. The Rams get a solid backup quarterback, and I think Bennett was actually Stafford's roommate at Georgia back in 2009. Speaking of not having a first round pick, the 49ers didn't have one either. Remember, they traded all their first round picks a few years ago for a guy who has definitely become an impact player worthy of such an investment. Certainly not a guy who's likely to be traded or be put on clipboard duty for Brock Purdy. No sir. But as I mentioned in my last video, it might not matter because the 49ers do most of their damage in the middle rounds anyway, somehow finding star players year after year, which I can only assume means the kicker they traded up for, Jake Moody out of Michigan, is about to to be the next Justin Tucker. The Arizona Cardinals are headed for an absolutely dreadful season, but at least they're positioning themselves for a soft landing. They traded back in the first round with the Texans and acquired their first round pick for next year, and that pick could legitimately be in the top 5. In fact, there's a chance the Cardinals have the top 2 overall picks in 2024 and could land themselves Caleb Williams plus an impact player at another position. Or they could take Caleb and trade the other pick to a quarterback-needy team and rack up even more high-value picks. Either way, the Cardinals leave this draft with a top-tier offensive tackle prospect and plenty of hope for the years to come, which they need because this year's going to be rough. The Carolina Panthers, they got their guy. I love the Bryce Young pick. He's smart, he's accurate, he's everything you want in a quarterback, so as long as the Panthers don't need him to change a light bulb or reach the top shelf at the grocery store or fix a tangled basketball net, they should be good to go. They even got him a weapon in the form of Jonathan Mingo from Ole Miss, which is smart because I don't think a receiving core of Adam Thielen and DJ Chark is really striking fear into the hearts and minds of opponents. The Panthers should be fairly competitive this season though, as long as they don't lose Bryce Young and the couch cushions before week 1. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers outlook reminds me of the Cardinals. It's not quite as bleak, but it's definitely in a spot where things are going to get worse before they get better. But hey, they got Kalijah Kancey, big boy in the middle, that'll help. More importantly though, the Bucs got one of my favorite players in the draft, Cody Mauch, O-lineman from North Dakota State. I mean, just look at this absolute specimen. I am in love. Plus, he makes it look like the Bucs are engaging in some kind of illegal cloning project because Mauch is going to be lining up right next to Ryan Jensen on this line, and these two look like they've been flipping hay bales together in rural Nebraska for 30 years. I'm just saying, if I was the Bucs quarterback, I would feel incredibly safe knowing these two are protecting me. The Atlanta Falcons took Bijan Robinson in the first round, which some people may question, saying the Falcons have more pressing needs, but when you think about it, it makes total sense. Arthur Smith was the Titans' offensive coordinator for 2 years when they had a lethal rushing attack led by Derrick Henry, so why wouldn't he want to recreate that? I mean, it's not like being stubbornly obsessed with the run game is the reason the Titans haven't reached a Super Bowl and always inevitably get beaten by higher-powered offenses because they can't keep up. I'm sure Arthur Smith building a team structured the exact same way the Titans were when he was there won't come back to bite him. This time will be different. Now, if you'll excuse me, I just want to look up the definition of insanity real quick. Meanwhile, in an effort to stop Bijan Robinson, the New Orleans Saints added Brian Brzee to their defensive line. Considering this line couldn't stop a nosebleed last year, this pick was logical. They also drafted Kendry Miller, who can either be viewed as a compliment to Alvin Kamara or his temporary replacement if Kamara finally gets suspended for beating the hell out of a guy at a Vegas nightclub. New Orleans also added Jake Haener in the 4th round as they double down on Fresno State quarterbacks in a desperate hope that that school can produce at least one above-average starter at some point. Moving on to the AFC, but before we do, be sure to like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. You'll help me keep the lights on and feed my family. Meaning me, I'm my family. All right, let's keep going. The New England Patriots had a fun first round. They started by absolutely screwing over the Jets by trading their number 14 pick to the Steelers, allowing the Steelers to jump the Jets and take offensive tackle Broderick Jones. Then the Patriots got the guy they likely would have selected with their original pick anyway, snatching up Christian Gonzalez at number 17. After that, they had the most Patriots draft of all time. They took a linebacker from the FCS, a center with the last name Andrews, a kicker, and a punter, and 2 late-round wide receivers that fans will fall in love with during training camp but will ultimately see no playing time. Remember I mentioned the New York Jets got screwed? Yeah, prioritizing the offensive line when you have the oldest starting quarterback in the NFL should probably be your primary goal, but none of the high-end prospects were left by the time the Jets were on the clock. Instead, they reached on linebacker Will McDonald. Overall, not a bad draft, but the Jets are putting a lot of stock in Mekhi Becton staying healthy this year, which... yeah, good luck. When I think of the Buffalo Bills and the thing that's held them back from getting over the hump and reaching a Super Bowl, you know what I think of? Tight end. That's the problem. It's gotta be. Or at least that's what the Bills think based on their pick of Dalton Kincaid, who they traded up to get. Now, I'm not a Dawson Knox guy by any means. I do think there's room for the Bills to upgrade at the tight end position. I'm just a little surprised they used their first round pick to do it, but they did address their other needs in the following rounds, especially with Osiris Torrance helping out the O-line. So maybe this draft class will finally help the Bills avoid getting rocked by the Chiefs and or Bengals every year. Imagine not having a first round pick because you tampered with a guy who beat the shit out of you for 20 years only to not end up getting him anyway. Well, that's what happened to the Miami Dolphins. So Cam Smith was their first pick in the 2nd round, and he'll join a secondary that just added Jalen Ramsey, so that's good. Miami actually only made 4 picks total, but honestly, that's fine. They were good last year, and as long as they can prevent Tua's brain from turning to jelly, they should be strong contenders. By the way, one of their 4 picks was Devon Achane, running back from Texas A&M. I don't know how much playing time he's going to get with how clogged this backfield is with average running backs, but I watched him a lot last year, and he's really good, so yeah, just wanted to mention that. Normally on draft day, the biggest priority for NFL teams is, you know, the draft, but this year the Ravens were focused on something else as they finally signed Lamar Jackson to a long-term deal just hours before the draft began. After that, though, it was time to reinforce this roster around Lamar, and they did that by drafting Zay Flowers in the 1st round. And I'm sure this pick will work out. After all, Baltimore has a great track record of drafting and developing wide receivers. I mean, who could forget certified studs like Miles Boykin, James Prochet, and Tylan Wallace? It's alright, though. They already addressed the wide receiver position when they gave $18 million to a guy who hasn't made a Pro Bowl in 7 years. The Cincinnati Bengals made sure that, much like T. Higgins, Miles Murphy never has to wear a color other than orange ever again. He'll add another element to a D-line that was already pretty good. Meanwhile, the Bengals are sort of rebuilding their secondary, so their next 2 picks being a corner and a safety made sense. Both DJ Turner and Jordan Battle will work to remove the stench left behind by Eli Apple, but that is a tall task. Some other notable picks, since he took 2 wide receivers that they totally need, not like they have any good ones, and a running back from Illinois who could fill in for Joe Mixon if he gets cut. or goes to jail. The Pittsburgh Steelers, my friends. We've already talked about their first round pick poaching Broderick Jones from the Jets. Thank you guys for cooperating with that. But they also made some nice picks after that. They kicked off day 2 by drafting projected first rounder Joey Porter Jr., a very cool pick since his dad also got drafted to Pittsburgh back in 1999. And then they got Darnell Washington, a very highly projected tight end who fell due to medical concerns, so he could be a bargain. Do I see any way the Steelers are better than the Bengals or the Ravens this season? Absolutely not. But knowing Mike Tomlin, he'll squeeze 9 wins out of them anyway. Draft day has been the Browns' Super Bowl for a long time, so it was kind of weird that they didn't even have a first round pick this year. I guess that's what happens when you mortgage your future to try and solve your quarterback problem with a shady dude who might not even be good anymore. But I digress. The Browns actually made their first pick in the 3rd round with wide receiver Cedric Tillman, adding to a wide receiver room that's pretty shallow beyond Amari Cooper. And then they took a DT, an OT, and a DTR. Still not convinced this team finishes anywhere but last in the AFC North, though. I stand by my comment that the Kansas City Chiefs shouldn't be allowed to have draft picks for as long as they have Patrick Mahomes. It's just not fair. But they did have draft picks, and they did pretty well with them. They took a defensive end with their first pick, which was at like midnight on the East Coast. These drafts are too long. And then they took Rashee Rice in the 2nd round, even though Mahomes definitely doesn't need receivers. I think he proved that this year. As long as he's got Kelsey and there are some warm bodies out wide for him to throw to occasionally, that's all he really needs. But I respect the Chiefs going one step further. Much like the Browns, the Denver Broncos also didn't have a first round pick because they traded it for a quarterback that underperformed tremendously last season. They took wide receiver Marvin Mims in the 2nd round because none of their current receivers actually want to make the leap and become a true number 1 option, so maybe he can do it. Although to be fair, Russell Wilson definitely wasn't helping. And unless Sean Payton can help him recapture even half of the production he had in Seattle, it doesn't matter what this team did in the draft. Let's ride. I mentioned in my video about biggest draft needs that the Chargers needed a receiver because Keenan Allen and or Mike Williams are always injured, and hey, they got one. They also drafted half of the TCU roster for some reason, which is fine as long as the Chargers don't have to play the Eagles at any point because we all know what happened the last time TCU played Georgia. I actually think the Chargers can take a step forward this year. They got a ton of talent on both sides of the ball, and hopefully Kellen Moore can stabilize things on the offensive side. They gotta stop choking though. Maybe somebody they drafted knows the Heimlich. The Las Vegas Raiders made out like bandits in this draft. They got Tyree Wilson at number 7, who was projected to go as high as 2nd overall, and they got tight end Michael Mayer in the 2nd round, who was projected to be a first rounder. Now they have another pass rusher alongside Max Crosby to create some havoc for opposing quarterbacks. Not a bad thing when your division has Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert in it. And they have a tight end to replace Darren Waller so they don't have to rely on the newly signed Austin Hooper or OJ Howard, whose ESPN headshot is him wearing the uniform of a team he never played a snap for. Truthfully, the Raiders are going to be mid, but at least they have some fun pieces. The Jacksonville Jaguars are the heavy favorites to win the AFC South, which, much like the Geno Smith thing, feels illegal to say, but they're coming off a season where they won the division by 2 games and all the teams behind them are either trending down or rebuilding. So it's Jacksonville's time, and they reloaded their roster by making approximately a million draft picks. I guess that's one way to make sure you address all your needs. Just draft at least one guy at literally every position, including fullback, which is wild because that position barely even exists anymore. Thank goodness the Houston Texans came to their senses and took CJ Stroud. I don't know why this wasn't the obvious and expected pick all along. The Texans need a quarterback. Stroud's a great quarterback prospect. Shouldn't be that hard. And thankfully, at the end of the day, it wasn't. Houston also doubled down on splashy first round picks by trading back up to number 3 and taking Will Anderson. Yes, they gave up their first round pick next year to do it, but if they end up with franchise players on both sides of the ball, who cares? They also got Tank Dell as a weapon for Stroud so he doesn't have to feed 15 targets a game to Robert Woods. Smart. And they got Henry To'oTo'o, who has a cool name. The Tennessee Titans took Peter Skoronski, who fell a little further than some may have expected, but the real headline is the Titans' 2nd round pick, Will Levis. After falling down draft boards harder than I fell on my head as a baby, Levis didn't even show up to the draft on day 2. And I don't really blame him. The cameras cut to him every 5 seconds just to be like, hey, this guy's sad. Look how sad this guy is. So yeah, I wouldn't want to show up either. But now he's a Titan and he'll join all the other toddler quarterbacks in the AFC South, other than the guy ahead of him on the depth chart, obviously, but I'm just choosing to ignore him because he's boring. Jim Irsay is a menace and said some weird things leading up to the draft, but the Indianapolis Colts ended up making the right pick. They brought in Anthony Richardson, who's probably the highest upside quarterback in this entire class. He just also has a floor that looks more like a basement, but still, a smart pick, definitely better than Levis. And they got him a weapon later on in the draft with Josh Downs, who Reggie Wayne said was the best receiver in the class. Now, I don't know about that, but I do know that this version of the Colts is going to be a lot more fun to watch than when the corpse of Matt Ryan was trying to complete passes to Mo Alley-Cox. They also drafted Adetomiwa Adebawore, and did I include that note just to flex that I know how to pronounce his name? Maybe. That's my take on how every team did in this year's NFL draft. Now we just have to wait for the season to actually get here, but don't worry, I'm sure the time will fly by, and the next 3 months won't be painfully slow as we eagerly await the always disappointing Hall of Fame game. Now, if you don't mind, I'm gonna go stare at a calendar and try to make it move faster. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. I love you guys, and I'll see you next time.